Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a horror story from a netizen who experienced it in the mountains. When I was young, it took about half an hour by bike to get to school. There was a bus, but the bus cost money. I didn't want to ask my parents for bus money all the time. Money was kind of a taboo subject back then in our family, so I was happy to go to school by bicycle. The route to school was simple enough. There was a river flowing halfway through the route from east to west. There were two routes you could choose. The first route goes alongside the river on the north side, but there's a national highway, so there's a lot of traffic. Even at night it's a little dangerous. The other route was the opposite side of the highway. This way was a lot more peaceful. There were only a few houses out there. You also had nicer scenic views. You could see the mountains, countryside fields and, of course, the dense forest. If you take this route at night, it's really unlikely that you'll pass by a car, a bike or person walking the streets. There were rumors about this route. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Some people said that ghosts appeared on that route. There were literally no streetlights. Because of this, most of the students at my school avoided that route on the way home. Not me. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I had ridden through the forest on that side with my dad since I was a kid. I knew the way so well that even when I came home late, I would turn the lights off on my bike and rely solely on the moonlight to guide me. It was relaxing. I would listen to the sound of the river. There was a really cool part of the woods where the branches of the trees had created this kind of natural arch. It looked like it was right out of the storybook. I loved it. On the night that this experience takes place, I was heading home late from school. I took part in some club activities, so it wasn't uncommon for me to be late home. It was already past 9 p.m. and I'd stayed late to speak to friends. Someone said that a typhoon was coming and we were all hoping that school would be closed tomorrow. So we didn't mind staying a little late if we weren't going to hang out tomorrow. The warm breeze was strong, so I decided to head home before the weather turned. So I chose my usual route, home through the forest, just in case it rained. The clouds were low and looking gray. My bike had a kinetic energy-powered light bulb, so if I hit a switch it would make pedaling a little harder, but it would provide light. I hit the switch but the light didn't come on. I guessed that the bulb had bust. This was just what I needed. I tried to kick on and hurry home before it rained. It was so dark out, but my eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness. I was able to keep going with confidence along the roads, but I had to slow as I entered the forest. As I entered the forest, I felt that something was different. I felt a little frightened of the woods. That night I told myself that I didn't need to be scared. The forest is creepy at night, but it's the hole in the ear that lets in the fear that in the absence of light. I pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind and entered the woods. Headwinds grew strong as I passed through the woods. It made pedaling harder and harder. I grinned in bed. I just wanted to go home. All of a sudden, there was a weird smell which accompanied the wind. It smelled so bad that I thought I could see something popping up and down out of the dark just ahead. I stared forward puzzled, and then that was when I felt something grab my left shoulder. I have never been scared of the forest, but that night changed everything. I pedaled as fast as I could, making a voiceless scream against the wind. My heart was racing. I was terrified. I put some distance between myself and where I felt the hand on my shoulder, and I thought to myself, whoa, finally, I had a paranormal experience. I hope that's the end of it. I kept riding. I was powered by adrenaline. I swear I heard something behind me. I didn't have the courage to look behind me. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. There was even less visibility than before. I hated it. Thankfully, The path had widened and it was largely flat. For some reason I shouted the name of my dog and then I pedaled noticeably faster. I got through the forest and I began to see the welcome sight of neighboring houses through the branches in the trees. I still didn't have the courage to look back and check if anything was following me. When I came out of the woods, there was a convenience store just the other side of the bridge. I chose that to be the point where I would look behind me. There was nothing chasing me. I felt my heart rate slow. I locked up my bike outside of the convenience store and I headed in. I have never been so happy to hear the sound of the entry bell in my life. I got even happier when I saw that a couple of my friends were stood by the magazine rack. They laughed and said that I looked like I had just seen a ghost. I chuckled with them, but I was too embarrassed to tell them what had happened. One of them looked at my shoulder with a grimace and said and then asked, Mate, what happened to your shoulder? It's filthy. The fear came, rushing back to me. I looked at my shoulder and there was some disgusting stain there. Immediately I unbuttoned my shirt and I hurled it into the trash. My friends all laughed and asked what the hell I was doing. I just got on my bike and left. When I got home, my mom asked me about what happened and why I wasn't wearing a goddamn shirt. I just said that I forgot it at school. Relax. I had an undershirt on. Dinner was ready for me and I was hungry. I chowed down, and with chowing down comes clarity and rationality, because I arrived at the conclusion that perhaps something from above in the trees had fallen, blown by the wind, to land on my shoulder. Perhaps it wasn't a paranormal experience. With that in mind, I felt kind of embarrassed about how I acted back at the convenience store. I was a little scared, so I got my big sister and the dog to stay in my room that night. Unfortunately, school wasn't closed the next day. The typhoon didn't hit our area, so I had to go to school. However, thanks to my canine best friend, I was able to sleep and sleep well. When I woke up, I had started to think that I had created a scene out of nothing. The embarrassment hadn't faded. I had breakfast with my family, grabbed an umbrella, and headed to school. I chose the other route to school. That morning I took a look at the forest when I got to the bridge and it didn't look that daunting. But still I didn't want to go in there. On that day, during lunch, I heard a story. I heard something that would justify my fears out there in the dark woods. I wasn't the only one who had an encounter out in the forest. There was a boy at school who was delivering newspapers. He was a couple of years older than me and my friend group, but my sister knew him anyway. His job was to deliver newspapers in our area in a small village just beyond the edge of the forest. So, like me, he used the forest to get to and from his newspaper round. He would make these deliveries early, like really early. He was out on his bike, delivering at 5:30 am. Up at the crack of dawn, he headed through the woods as usual and stopped still in his tracks when he saw a body swinging in the morning breeze. The body's neck hung, crooked from a tree limb. This is where mine and his stories crossed paths, because I don't think I was grabbed on the shoulder that night. No, I think it was the clatter of some dangling foot that brushed my shoulder. I do not know if the individual who chose to take their life could have been saved at that point. But there is one thing I do know: had the light on my bicycle worked, I might have been able to do something to save them if it wasn't too late. I think about that night more than I'd like to admit. Yeah, if the light was working, maybe things would have been different. I never go through the forest these days. This happened when I went on a fishing trip with my dad. My dad absolutely loves to fish and he would always invite me. I like fishing, sure, but I guess I wasn't as passionate as he was about it. He loved mountain stream fishing, and, I'll be honest, that was probably my favorite thing to do too. So on the first day, mountain stream fishing was an opportunity to do. We were ready to go. This all happened when I was in elementary school. By the way, I think that I was about 6. I remember it very well, not only for the reasons that will become clear shortly, but because it was the first time we ever went deeper into the mountainous woods. We never went in that far before, but I think the year prior yielded a fruitless fishing haul. So my dad wanted to go in search of a new fishing spot. The stream we used wasn't a secret amongst stanglers, and there would always be a bunch around dotted either side of the length of the stream. It was common to see tents along the sides of the stream. These numbers grew less and less the further you went into the darker woods. The mountain provided that darkness. The much-needed shade was welcome, but with darkness came fear, especially for a boy my age. I knew that mountain stream fishing wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. There were dangers everywhere, and I thanked my dad for making me aware of them. You could fall, get lost, get an injury, wind up in distress, and you could also encounter a wild animal such as bears. My dad and I had a radio for these instances and bear repellent. My dad actually used to bring fireworks out too. You know, like a firecracker or something. He believed that this would frighten off something or at least alert something or our position should we need help. He took all matters of precaution on our fishing trips, and I'm so glad that he did so. That day we were in search of the perfect fishing spot, and it seemed as if we had found it. We could see that the stream was teeming with life. There were fish everywhere. We approached it from above, and all we had to do was to send the mountain a little bit. So that's just what we did. We headed down with big grins on our faces. On the way down, I noticed something. There was a tent. There was a smell in the air too. It wasn't great. It was pretty awful. Food containers, clothes and other personal items were scattered around the tent. The tent was ripped too. Something was wrong, and into my young mind I knew what had happened. This was the work of the bear. We had no idea if the bear was still nearby, but with that at the forefront of my mind, I began to tremble. My dad kept walking. Although he had stopped speaking, he was approaching the tent. I thought he was going to see if the man in the tent was okay. I was certain that the man in the tent must be dead. There was so much destruction around. It was a harrowing scene. My dad stopped, turned to me and said, "Don't touch anything. Nothing at all. The bear will be back. We have to go." I can't describe how I felt on the way back to the car, but it felt like I wasn't living, just existing, like the life in me was on pause. I'm not sure if that means anything to anyone but me. But hey, that's how I felt. I had never been conscious of death until that day. Death was so cruel. Nature was so indifferent. We found out, once we reported the tent to the mountain ranger, that the man was indeed dead. They believed that the bear was still out there. There's nothing much more I can say, but be careful when you go into the woods and the mountains. Keep your wits about you and survey your surroundings. This happened when I was in the 3rd grade of elementary school. I really loved to fish back then, and I still love fishing to this day. It was school summer holidays and I was going fishing almost every single day with my grandpa in a nearby stream. It was way out in the woods in the shadow of huge mountains. The water was so clean. You could see the fish perfectly, and there were a lot of fish. So one hot summer's day I decided to go to this fishing spot by myself. I can't remember why I did this. Maybe he said he was busy on that day, or I was feeling extra curious or brave. It started as a great adventure for me. I loved the new sense of independence it gave me. I left home so early that morning that it was still dark out. I got on my bike with my fishing gear on my back and I headed towards the mountains. I'll be honest, I didn't know the way perfectly at that age. I spent some time riding back and forth, up and down roads which didn't seem familiar. I didn't even consider turning back, though I was determined to go on a solo fishing trip that day. Thinking back on, it was a really bad idea. I mean, I didn't tell anyone I was leaving that morning, and they, like me, would have no idea where I was going. I could have easily got lost, injured, or worse. I found the entrance to the mountain rails. I remembered it because there was a stone Jesus statue there. Finally, I was ready to go fishing. I locked up my bike, like I had seen Grandpa do 100 times. Grabbed my fishing gear, my water and my snacks I brought from home, and I started heading down the trail. I walked for a while. I expected to notice something along the way which would remind me of the direction I should be heading in. You know where to turn off for something, but nothing seemed too familiar. What didn't help was the fact that there was a thick morning mist out that morning. After a while, I heard the sound of running water, and I knew I must be close to the stream. I pushed through the thick dew, soaked grass, and through a gap in the trees. And there it was, the mountain stream. I must have been beaming. I was so proud that I got there by myself. I felt so mature, selecting the little spot where I would set up my things. I took my time to get everything perfect. I was crazy about fishing. I fished, took a nap, had my lunch. Things were going swimmingly. It was great. I stayed there from morning to the afternoon. The sun must have moved to the other side of the mountain, because my surroundings were getting dimmer and dimmer. I had caught a lot of fish. I pretty much had a full bucket. I was thinking to myself, I gotta get home and show this to Grandpa. So I started packing things up, and it was at this point I sensed something. Something felt off in the area. Everything was silent. There were no noises from bugs, birds, wind, or water. There was nothing. I'm the only one out here in the mountains, I thought to myself. When that thought arrived, it was followed by a tremendous sense of dread. Fear rose from somewhere deep down. I got my stuff together quickly, and I headed out of there as soon as I could. After all was packed up, I headed towards the slope to return to the original path and head out of the woods. I took one final precautionary glance back at where I had set up my fishing gear, and I was stunned to see that a man was now stood there. I don't remember much about him, except for the fact that he was really tall and he was wearing a straw hat. He stood there still as a statue, staring. That's where I had been fishing. Well, maybe glaring is a more appropriate word. He looked angry. He had just discovered my fishing spot, and I felt for sure he was there to take my fishing spot. I don't know why I had that feeling, but I did. It felt like he was there to destroy or take something. I felt as if I had done something to upset him, so I instinctively ran before he spotted me. I was carrying too much, so I slipped and tripped over. I picked myself up and looked back towards the river, towards the man. I guess that I must have screamed or shouted as I fell, because I realized that he was looking right at me. As I got back to my feet, I hated his stare. His eyes were cold. I scrambled up towards the main trail, and I walked as fast as I could towards the entrance. I couldn't run. I had brought so many things, and on top of that I had a bucket of fish to carry. I thought that he would just leave me alone. I mean, why would anyone pursue a kid my age alone in the woods? He was about 20 meters behind me, and he shouted oi at me. It wasn't an angry shout. It was something that sounded like he was trying to be nice actually, but I wasn't going to stop. I had seen that glare of his, and I had felt that gut feeling. I was getting away from him. I was determined. Wait, he called. The tone was different this time. The second I heard that, I knew that it was time to run. I ran as fast as I could for about 10 minutes. I remember the sweat beating down my forehead, getting into my eyes. Both of my arms weren't free. I had all the gear and the fish to bring back. It had gotten darker too. I really wanted to go home. I wished that my granddad or my parents were here. I had to stop running. I had to take a break. How long can you keep that speed up? Could just wait. I just want to talk to you. I heard him call from behind. He had been walking this entire time. He had wanted me to use up my energy. I guess an adult could easily catch up to a kid my age if they really wanted to. The sun had been replaced by the moon a matter of moments. This definitely didn't seem possible. Even my young mind understood that looking back towards the man yielded a sightless view of nothing but darkness. But amidst that darkness came the shuffling of feet. He was still coming after me. I was getting breathless. I knew that if I didn't run, that I would never make it home. There was something walking in the dark right behind me, maybe human. I don't know. but there was something there in the dark and it seemed invisible. I heard that. Boy, again it was closer. Now it was the voice of the man in the straw hat. I just kept running. Just keep running. Just keep running. I told myself, tears were in my eyes. Now I wanted the man in the hat to leave me alone. I didn't like that. I couldn't see him. I really didn't like it. I didn't like him. I shouted, I'm sorry. And then from behind I heard, I'm gonna kill you. I ran down that mountain as fast as I could. I don't remember much. After this point, I didn't even bother trying to get my bike. I just ran as fast as I could. When I got home, my parents were so angry with me, and rightly so. I was covered in mud and cuts and scratches, so I think that they had some sympathy for me. I remember not being in as much trouble as I thought I would be. I dropped the bucket of fish along the way and a lot of my fishing gear. I couldn't even brag to my grandpa about my haul. I didn't tell anyone about the man in the woods. I think that if anyone went looking for him, they wouldn't find him. He seemed to be as old as the woods, or at least a part of the woods. I don't know why I feel that, but I do. I was banned from fishing for the remainder of the summer, which I guess I understand, but I wish that my parents had chosen to punish me in some other way because sadly, Grandpa passed away by the time the following summer rolled around, and we never got to go fishing again. I didn't ever fish along that stream again. That stream is a place where some of my most cherished childhood memories were created and where some of my worst nightmares were born. The woods are a magical place. I always think of the good and bad times during the summer, so I forgot to mail a card that I was supposed to mail before the end of the year. It was really important to send it before New Year's, even though I forgot. I knew that the card was going to get there late, but I decided to head out and post it at around 11 p.m. on New Year's Day. I'm from the countryside and the closest post box to my place was about a mile away, and all I had at the time was a push bike. It was a particularly dark winter that year and the streetlights were sparse in the area. The moon was hidden beneath the clouds and there was darkness all around me. I used the lights on my bicycle light. Snow was falling. The distance between each house in my neighborhood was huge. No one really lived out here, and that meant that there was no cars or pedestrians on the streets, and it was New Year's Day after all. Well, New Year's night. Despite all these factors, I managed to find a car parked up just over 2/3 of the way into my journey. It was only just visible from the road. It was stopped on a mountain rail, and it was quite far down the mountain rail off of the main road and into the woods. The lights were off in the car. There was no sign of life in there. I thought the worst. To be honest, I thought that someone drove out here halfway down that trail, sealed their windows and doors, and then took their own life. Through some kind of asphyxiation, I had to pass that car to get to the mailbox. Like I said, it was halfway down a slope on the mountain rail. I figured that I would just head down the hill and pass it as quickly as I could. I continued my route, posted my card in the mailbox, and then headed back home. I would be pushing my bike up the trail, this time on the way back, so I thought that I would get a look into the car to see what was going on. I wanted to be as slow as I could when I passed the car, but I must have run over a while pushing my bike because my bicycle's headlights shone directly into the car. I was shocked by what I saw. I didn't notice the first time because of the way the car was facing and how dark it was when I was approaching from the other direction. But when I saw it approaching from the other direction, I saw red handprints on the interior of the windscreen and red bloody hand prints. I involuntarily stopped walking and pushing my bike. I know now what I should have done. I should have gone to the closest house in the area or called the police from a payphone. This happened before it was common to carry cell phones. By the way I approached the car, it was at this point somebody jumped out from behind some trees on the far side of the car. I have never been so terrified. There before my eyes was a man covered in blood brandishing a sickle. I ran, and what I should have done was head down the hill towards the town, towards people, but what I did was head up the hill towards my home. I got on my bike and pedaled for all I was worth, but I could hear him gaining on me. He swung that sickle and it made a horrible noise as it swished through the air. I think he was aiming for my back tire. I went through the gears on my bike and he was still gaining on me. He hit the back of my bike a few times. I heard the metal clank as one hit from that thing staggered me. I nearly lost my balance. Finally, I got back to the main road and I managed to put some distance between myself and that psycho up ahead. I saw a house and I turned into its drive, probably another mistake on my part. Because since I was now on flat ground, I could have easily raced away from him. I turned back to see where he was, but he was gone. My bike had scratches and the air from my tire was hissing. There was blood in those scratches. I remembered the car and registration number and I thought about reporting it, but I felt that if I did, I would be accused of something. I felt like it would be a bad way to start the year. Yeah. So I kept putting it off and eventually it got too long to do anything about it. And yeah, I still haven't reported it and it's been years. Sorry. I never heard anything about it on the news and I wonder if I was the only one to encounter that car and that man in the woods that night. It's been about 14 or 15 years since this happened. There's a mountain right behind my family home. My room was on the second floor and it looked out towards the mountain. It was pretty amazing to be that close to something so beautiful. The public footpath that leads to the mountain goes by my window. So as nice as it was to have the mountain there, you also had to make sure because you never knew who could be looking in on you. Back then I was still at school and I really liked listening to the radio while I was studying. I used to leave my studies to the last minute. I mean, who didn't at my age, right? So I'd be up late and I would hop around the radio stations because I knew if I put the TV on I would be to the study. I would listen to the radio, but only at a low volume, because the rest of my family would be asleep. One night, it was past midnight and I heard another noise beside the sound of my radio. I didn't know where it was coming from because it was quite faint. At first, I wanted to know what it was, so I turned down the radio and tried to listen for the sound. I realized what that sound was. It sounded like someone was descending the mountain. The footsteps were very light. Then my spine turned ice cold. As I heard the voice of a child, I felt sweat line my brow. I didn't know what to do. Then logic came crawling back to me. It was too unrealistic. Why would a child be out there coming down the mountain path after midnight? I asked myself this question. Whilst listening intently, I heard the sounds of multiple pebbles skidding down the path. I could imagine the exact position where someone might be on the trail. Then I heard another voice. It was another child's voice. The voices seemed to mix and overlap one another. They grew quieter and quieter, as if they wanted to remain inconspicuous. What was strange was the fact that the voices, although they seemed to be on the path which would lead them away from the mountain, never came down the path towards our home, towards town. The voices just seemed to linger in the darkness just outside of my field of view. It was really scary at a young age to hear that. And another thing, I could hear the voices, but I couldn't make out what they were talking about. They never sounded distressed either there. I once scared stiff listening to this sound and just as soon as I heard it seemed to fade out. The voices seemed to head back towards the mountains. I told my dad about it in the morning and he told me something which creeped me out and pulled up my heartstring. In days gone by, this mountain had a series of huts built there. These huts were used during epidemics such as tuberculosis, and infected families were sent into isolation to keep the majority safe and to prevent the spreading of disease. Some of these families had children, and it stands to reason that some of those children might have outlived their parents. Some of them might not have even been infected. Perhaps they wandered the mountain not knowing where they were going to. Perhaps they stayed out there, away from the town that banished them, not wanting to leave their parents' side. I think that they're still out there. Of course our house wasn't there back in those days, so perhaps they don't know how to get down the mountain with our house in the way. It's sad. If you like the stories, please drop a like and let me know. I'll see you again soon, you.